Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Anzac Day National Ceremony will commence shortly, so that we ask, could you now please take your seats? Now, should you need assistance to locate a member of your party, please make your way to the information marquee on the left as you face the memorial. Now, should you require first aid or toilet facilities, assistance can be sought from staff. To maintain the dignity of the occasion, could you please turn off your mobile phone or switch it to silent? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the 103rd anniversary of the Anzac landing on Gallipoli. My name is Scott Bevan. On behalf of Mr. Kerry Stokes, Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, and the Director, the Honourable Dr. Brendan Nelson, and staff, thank you all for joining us this morning. Anzac Day is the day Australians throughout our nation and across the world remember and reflect upon the landing on Gallipoli in 1915. The spirit of Anzac, with its human qualities of courage, of mateship, endurance and sacrifice, continue to bring meaning and relevance to our sense of national character and identity. It also honours the day in which young Australians and New Zealanders forged in bloody sacrifice the bond within which our two nations continue to live. On this day, we reflect upon and pay tribute to the service of our veterans during ceremonies in cities, in towns, and remote areas across this nation and in a number of locations overseas. We pause here at the Australian War Memorial for Australia's national ceremony of commemoration. The memorial would like to acknowledge the dignitaries who are joining us on the dais. We also welcome the veterans who have served, those who are still serving, the families who love and support them, the thousands of visitors who have joined us here today, and those watching the televised broadcast by the ABC. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk commanded the Turkish 19th Division and the Anafata Group during the Gallipoli campaign of 1915, and he subsequently became the founding president of the Republic of Turkey in 1923. In 1934, President Ataturk delivered a message of reconciliation to visitors from Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain. Well, the commander of the 2nd Corps Turkish First Army, Lieutenant General Zekai Aksakala, will now deliver that message, which will be followed by the translation in English. Thank you, Lieutenant General Aksakala.
Lieutenant General Zekai Aksakallı. Değerli misafirler, dünyada ilk defa bir savaş ebedi dostluğun doğmasına sebep olmuştur. Şimdi sizlere modern Türkiye'nin kurucusu, Çanakkale kahramanı Mustafa Kemal Atatürk'ün Anzac annelerine hitaben göndermiş olduğu duygu dolu ve çok önemli mesajlar içeren mektubu okuyacağım. Unutulmamalıdır ki bu mesaj aynı zamanda Türk milletinin sizlerle ilelebet sürecek olan dostluğumuzun mesajıdır. Bu memleketin toprakları üzerinde kanları döken kahramanlar. Burada bir dost vatanın toprağındasınız. Huzur ve sükun içinde uyuyunuz. Sizler Mehmetçik'le yan yana koyun koyunasınız. Uzak diyarlardan evlatlarını harbe gönderen analar. Gözyaşlarınızı dindiriniz. Evlatlarınız bizim bağrımızdadır. Huzur içindeler, huzur içinde rahat uyuyacaklar. Onlar bu toprakta canlarını verdikten sonra artık bizim evlatlarımız olmuştur. Distinguished guests, for the first time in the world, a war caused the birth of an eternal friendship. Now, I would like to read the letter, including full of sense and special messages, sent to be addressed to Anzac mothers by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, founder of modern Turkish Republic and hero of Gallipoli Wars. It should not be forgotten, this message is the most important indicator of Turkish nation with your nation, which means that our friendship will last forever. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmet to us. Where they lie side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers, he sent their sons from faraway countries. Wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace after having lost their lives. On this land, they have become our sons as well. Thank you.
Ataturk's moving words, today inscribed on the Turkish monument at Aribanu on the northern headland of Anzac Cove, have long provided comfort to the bereaved families of those who fell on Gallipoli. In all, more than 130,000 lives were lost during the Gallipoli campaign. Service personnel from Australia, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, France, India and Turkey, with most of these soldiers buried on the Gallipoli Peninsula. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Guard of Honour mounted by the Australian Defence Force Academy and the band of the Royal Military College Duntroon. Today's Guard of Honour is made up of 1st, 2nd and 3rd year midshipmen and officer cadets from the Australian Defence Force Academy's Foxtrot Squadron. Foxtrot Squadron was the Academy's leading squadron in 2017, earning the privilege to provide the Guard on this significant day. Mr. Kerry Stokes, the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Ms. Christine Simpson-Stokes, the Director, the Honourable Dr. Brendan Nelson, and Ms. Gillian Adamson will now make their way to the saluting dais to await the arrival of the New Zealand High Commissioner, His Excellency Mr. Chris Seed. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the arrival of the New Zealand High Commissioner, His Excellency Mr. Chris Seed.
And I turn! Jump!
Arriving in just a moment will be the Acting Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Michael McCormack, and Mrs. Catherine McCormack. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome the Acting Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Michael McCormack, and Mrs. Catherine McCormack.
And I turn! Jump!
Arriving in just a moment, the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, His Excellency General the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, and Her Excellency Lady Cosgrove. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome the Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, His Excellency General the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, and Her Excellency Lady Cosgrove. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Wing Commander Jonathan Lilly will now play the didgeridoo from the parade ground in front of the Stone of Remembrance. Wing Commander Lilly is a member of the Warramai people of Williamtown, just near Newcastle in New South Wales. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you now watch a short video montage on the screens.
I became thought-oriented towards army life. This was going to be it. Felt that this was your little area, and the way you were playing your part wasn't so bad after all. Let's get to it.
When we were terribly busy, of course, it was 14 hours one day and 13 and a half hours the next day, 7 days a week. You wouldn't believe it. We had men that had lost limbs, and they would require a lot of TLC, if you like to put it that way. You know, they like to think that you would do something a little bit of extra special for them. We thought they were very worthy of it.
As we staggered along the force march, the remnants from the Eora Creek, coming along at the rear, just in front of me, was Rowley Looms, one of my mates. Down went Rowley into the water. He couldn't get up, and I couldn't help him. I had the strength. The pack on his back was weighing him down. Some of the boys come along and eventually we got him up. I felt so ashamed that I couldn't rush in and grab him. I wasn't capable of it. There were times when I think that we'd decided we'd had our last glimpse of home. We'd had our last glimpse of Australia. And we were just marching on to infinity.
I well remember some of my own mates that were actually pulled out dead, and we helped to bury them. We suddenly realised how fearsome, how futile is the real warfare.
The work that they did, the compassion that they showed, it was just unbelievable. And certainly there's no doubt about it that when things are going bad, when you're under pressure with very little to come and go on, it's then when true mateship seemed to show out.
As far as the men were concerned, if they had a mate or a person that came in, one of the boys that came in, they seemed to form their mateship very quickly, and they'd look after them so well, you wouldn't believe it. That's where, you know, they talk about mateship sometimes, and I think it's got a hollow sound, because in those days it was real mateship. They did anything for each other. When they got home, there were some that had lost limbs, and there were others who'd lost their minds. We did have men that were more damaged inside. They seemed to be pretending to be the big, strong soldiers. They were all quite young, and they feared about returning to life and not being as they were. And I think that played on their minds a lot.
The scars of war mark each one of us in a different way. Some obviously could never settle back into Seve Street. Remembering that these young men, most of them, 18 and some younger than 18, were thrown into this conflict situation, were finding it terribly hard to adjust, terribly hard to adjust.
I think we all have learned a lot and have a great deal to be thankful for, being able to learn the lesson of true comradeship, because virtually what one man had, everybody shared. And although I wouldn't like to see any future generations having to go through such an experience, I have no doubt that if they do, they too will learn the value of comradeship really shines through under the most harshest of conditions.
Grandchildren saying to their grandfathers, you know, your medals, Dad, Pa, can I have those, you know, later on? Can I march with you? Tell me where you were.
That stirring footage from the Second World War that you have just watched touches briefly on the experiences of the greatest generation that this nation has produced. Born in the aftermath of the war that was, growing up through the Great Depression and coming to adulthood under the shadows of the war that was coming, They mobilised to defend our nation, its values and vital interests. They would then undertake the economic and social reconstruction of Australia, laying the foundations for the prosperity enjoyed by subsequent generations. Well, they're leaving us. This generation is almost gone. But today, in a break with tradition, we have the great honour of hearing the reflections of just one of these magnificent Second World War veterans. We are humbled and extremely proud to introduce Mr. Robert Semple. Now, Robert was born on the 4th of May 1920 in the Melbourne suburb of Essendon. He grew up playing any and every sport he could, and he became a keen musician, playing the violin and the bagpipes. At the age of 16, he joined the cadet corps of the local militia unit, the Victorian Scottish Regiment. He saved for months to buy his kilt. And when he turned 18, he transitioned into the 5th Battalion of the Victorian Scottish Regiment. While working in the rag trade in Flinders Lane in Melbourne, he heard on an old wireless the declaration of war. He enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force at Caulfield Racecourse in June 1940. He left Australia and arrived in Palestine in November of that year. He joined the 2nd 12th Australian Field Regiment. Robert served during the siege of Tobruk in 1941, becoming one of the renowned Rats of Tobruk. And he's the president of the Victorian Rats of Tobruk Association. Robert served as a gun sergeant at El Alamein in 1942 and was later mentioned in dispatches for distinguished service in New Guinea and Borneo. He has since been awarded the British Empire Medal and the Medal of the Order of Australia for his ongoing service to the community. Well, Robert's uncle, Private John Knox Adams, was killed at the Gallipoli landing 103 years ago today while serving with the 7th Battalion. He was just 22 years old. Well, ladies and gentlemen, at almost 98 years young, please welcome Mr. Robert Semple.
Good morning to all on parade. I do so in the general sense, and I hope our distinguished guests that are sitting with me on this dais will understand we are all one of the same team. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brendan Nelson, OA, and the Council of the War Memorial for the invitation to attend the 2018 Anzac Day National Ceremony at this magnificent War Memorial here in Canberra. It is an extraordinary experience to gather with the national leaders, service personnel, families and visitors at this hallowed place, to reflect on the significance of tremendous sacrifice made embracing the Anzac story and beyond. Having served as an original of the 2nd 12th Australian Field Regiment, 9th Australian Division in World War II, in all of its campaigns in the Middle East, New Guinea and Borneo over a period of 5 years. Presented with many challenges to the mind and body which required a special type of mateship, discipline and motivation to achieve aims and objectives. Quite often in times of stress in action, a reflection on the example and determination set by our ancestors, our Anzac forefathers, are provided with the inspiration to go that extra yard and achieve the desired result. I believe there are more Victoria Cross winners resting below the sea and land, also in the air, than ever walked on the earth's surface. They are in God's care. In an endeavour to perhaps more fully express some personal feelings, may I take the liberty of presenting these thoughts whilst relaxing at home post-World War II, 1939-45. The anxiety and fear factor which generally preceded most new combat encounters was noticeably overcome as experience increased with each engagement. I vividly recall the experience and the strength and loyalty and faith experienced on occasions at Eleanor Main, when often in static positions and not operating the QF 25-pounder field gun on target, coming under German Stuka dive bombing, also periodic shelling of the gun position by enemy counter-battery artillery fire, taking refuge in the skinny slit trench adjacent to the gun pit, holding hands across the shoulders and muttering, "If this is it, we all go together." Such was the spirit within the gun crew. These same characters have also engraved their names on the back of my old violin, which was part of our entertainment material in the gun pit, or on the tractor when we weren't in action. Cared for by the driver, and it is here with me in Canberra today for Dr. Brendan Nelson and our distinguished people to view this object. The skill level of the owner has waned somewhat over the 75 years since Alamein. An appreciation of mateship, reliability, and unquestionable to our trust in each other seem to characterise the overall casual nature of the Australian makeup, and was certainly experienced with my unit and the division as a whole throughout the war. These qualities and feelings were of great assistance in designing life after the war and in the following rehabilitation process. To experience by circumstance and not by design something money could not buy, something which could not be artificially created, and certainly one of the reasons why we want to get together as often as possible in the bond of special comradeship centred on a cause which has a focus for a particular reason. It is good for the soul, and I believe rewarding to the inner person. I am sure when we pause and reflect from time to time why we come together, it has a great deal to do with circumstances and mateship. To conclude, may I humbly say Anzac Day remains sacred to all of us, that is all of us here. Let us continue to make reference to the past, but go forward into the future with honour and courage, lest we forget. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Semple, thank you for those beautiful words, for your service to our nation, and for your contribution to making us the people we are today. We are, sir, forever grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, the Guard of Honour, mounted by the Australian Defence Force Academy and the Band of the Royal Military College Duntroon, will now leave the parade ground.
And I turn. Jump.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to introduce Mr. Mike Bailey to provide today's march commentary.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would first like to invite His Excellency General the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, to make his way to the saluting dais, where he will review today's RSL ACT Branch Veterans March Past. For many decades, the ACT branch of the Returned and Services League of Australia has coordinated and delivered the Veterans March Past. This includes providing us with information on who is marching, the order they are marching, and how many are taking part. We thank RSL ACT branch for their efforts. Today, I will have the privilege of again providing you with a brief overview of the various units and groups as they march onto the parade ground. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2018 Anzac Day Branch Veterans March will now commence. The march traditionally starts with the arrival of the riderless horse, with the saddle stripped and riding boots reversed. This centuries-old tradition at military funerals and memorial ceremonies signifies the return home of the warrior's charger from the battlefield, his empty saddle showing that his master has fallen in battle. The horse today is a standard-bred gelding named Bill. He is known as a ride and drive, being usually employed as part of a 6-horse gun team. Bill is led by a soldier depicting an officer of the Australian Flying Corps in France in 1918. A fine tradition to begin the march. The parade commander for this morning's march is Mr. Robert Dick, National President of the Returned and Services League of Australia. In the unity of Anzac, Robert is accompanied today by Air Commodore Ian Moore of the Royal New Zealand Air Force. banner is carried by midshipmen and officer cadets in the Australian Defence Force Academy. Artillery units from the 1st Australian Division used the original banner in an Anzac Day service during the First World War. The group is accompanied by the National Military Reenactment Group, led by Captain Harry Locke, RANR. The National Military Reenactment Group is a Canberra-based group which brings alive history with a particular focus on First World War impressions. Static displays educate the younger generation of the World War. Particularly the Australian Army Apprentice Scheme, which began on the 2nd of August in 1948. On this day, the Australian Army opened a training school in Victoria to meet the growing technological needs of the post-war army. The school has since relocated from Balcombe to new purpose-built facilities at Latchford Barracks, Wanagilla, near Wodonga. From 1984 onwards, female apprentice schools commenced training. Graduates of the Army Apprentice Scheme have been credited with being the backbone of the maintenance, mobility and firepower of an ever-increasing technologically oriented army, providing electrical, mechanical, construction and engineering expertise in every area. By the way, marching with today's banner for the Australian Army Apprentices are the recipients of the RSL of Western Australia's Cadet of the Year. They represent the best ideals of the Australian Defence Force Cadets, one of Australia's leading youth development organisations. We are also able to welcome the Army Aviation Corps. The Australian Army Aviation Corps provides aviation reconnaissance, firepower support, air mobility, battlefield support and surveillance in a combined joint or interagency environment. Australian Army Aviation has traditional links to the Australian Flying Corps, the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery and the Royal Australian Air Force. In 1968, the Army Aviation Corps was formed, providing a coherent career path for aircrew and eventually ground support personnel. Also welcome the RSL ACT branch and sub-branches with the Commander Mr. Hon Kim, State President of the RSL ACT branch. This was formed, by the way, in 1916, one of Australia's oldest and most respected national organisations. The RSL evolved out of concern for the welfare Returned Sailors and Soldiers Imperial League of Australia was formed in 1916. Marking its 91st anniversary this year, the ACT branch was formed in 1927. Represented today are the RSL sub-branches of Belconnen, Campbell Russell, Gungahlin and Roden Valley, along with Tuggeranong, Hellenic, Vietnamese and Peacekeepers. We also proudly welcome a New Zealand contingent to the march. The New Zealand contingent includes veterans from the ACT and surrounding areas. Members in this group are currently serving in Canberra at the High Commission, the Department of Defence, or undergoing training at the various Australian services colleges. They embody links to the Anzac spirit forged between our two nations and the liberty. This year at the Anzac March, there is much emphasis on the role of women who have been a part of every conflict in which Australia has been represented. The Commander, Sarah Jane Gill, is leading this group of RANS, RAC, RAP personnel. And numerous marches across Australia today, these contingents of predominantly service women positioned towards the front, and Canberra is of course no different to that. By the left aims to broaden the public's perception of what a veteran looks like. Veterans are young, old, female, male, current and ex-service. The contingent comprises a combined servicewomen's group of veterans of many generations. Those marching are currently serving or have served in the Royal Australian Navy, the Army, the Royal Australian Air Force, or their predecessors. As mentioned, women have been involved in all of the conflicts in which Australia has been represented. During the Second World War, they played a vital role in the defence of the nation. As mentioned previously, we now have the Army Aviation Corps. This provides that reconnaissance support for combined joint or interagency environments. It has traditional links with the Australian Flying Corps, the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery, and the Royal Australian Air Force. John King, as mentioned, is State President of the RSL ACT branch, leading that branch and sub-branches as it passes today. Mobile veterans, including Passing the dais now, we are ourselves peacekeepers, part of United Nations forces. National service schemes in Australia instituted following the Second World War. Now the New Zealand contingent and World War II veterans. During the Second World War, Australian sailors and troops served in theatres from the tropical Pacific North Atlantic convoys. As a result, they also took part in almost every major naval battle, from the hunting of the German battleship Bismarck through to the German kamikaze attacks on the Philippines and Okinawa. Included there too were Second World War RAAF personnel. They extended to a strength of 180,000 during World War II. The RAAF served with distinction in the United Kingdom, Europe, the Middle East, Italy, North Africa, the Pacific, the Atlantic, Burma, India, and New Guinea. Also part of today's parade, the Korean War veterans. All three Australian services fought as part of the United Nations coalition that defended South Korea from North Korea and China between June 1950 and July 1953. They also served in South Korea as part of past armistice operations until 1957. Welcome now the Malaya and Borneo contingent. Malaya and Borneo Veterans Association and the Sandakan Families Association. The commander is Ian Davenport. The association membership is comprised of veterans of the Malayan emergency and the Indonesian confrontation. They are followed by the Vietnam War veterans. This contingent comprises veterans from the Royal Australian Navy, Australian Army, Australian Air Force, who have served in South Vietnam during the period between 1963 and 1965 and 1973. They represent involvement in all major battles during the Vietnam War, in which Australians fought and died. Now to the HMAS Sydney Escorts and Vietnam Logistics Support Veterans Association. It was the third HMAS Sydney, an ex-British light aircraft carrier, commissioned into the RAN in December 1948, went on to provide transport for so many troops to and from the war zone that was Vietnam. The HMAS Perth National Association has as its commander Mr. John Jack Aaron. It consists of former and serving officers and sailors who were part of one of 3 Royal Australian Navy ships named Perth. The Australian Army training team from Vietnam is also honoured, passing the dais at the moment, with the commander, Mr. Bill Dean. The Australian Army Training Team Vietnam consisted of specially selected volunteers who served throughout the length and breadth of South Vietnam. Passing now is number 9 Squadron of the RAAF Association. This was formed in 1939 at the RAF base Richmond as Australia's only fleet cooperation squadron. It operated Seagull and Walrus amphibian aircraft from RAN cruisers during the Second World War. Representatives from post-1900 operations and the Afghanistan War now passing the dais. A contingent too from East Timor, comprising veterans of Australia's commitment to peacekeeping operations in that country between September 1999 and December 2012. In 1999, under the command of the now Governor-General, His Excellency General, the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, Australia led a peacekeeping force to East Timor to restore order, following a vote for independence from Indonesia. We have a contingent too from the Gulf War, consisting of veterans who served in the first Gulf War in 1991, following Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Australian forces first deployed to Iraq in 2003 as part of the international coalition efforts to reduce Iraq's potential threat to the region, being honoured there among numerous other groups passing very quickly by the dais. We have representatives from the Rwanda contingent and also Somalia and operations in the Middle East. HMAS Canberra is also featured. Commissioned in 2014, HMAS Canberra is the inaugural leading and landing helicopter dock to be commissioned into the RAN. The Naval Welfare Officers Association, part of the contingent now passing the dais. They were formed in Melbourne in 1920, originally called the Ex-Navalmen's Association. We also have the Fleet Air Arm Association of Australia, with Mr. John Schonberg leading. The Submarine Association is also part of the contingent passing by at the moment. It was formed in the early 1980s, made up of serving and ex-service submariners from all countries. The primary function is to maintain the history and the unique spirit of the submarine service and provide advice and service to its members. The communications branch is another very important part of the Australian Army, this one from the Navy, of course, and the commander is Lieutenant Commander Dave Jeffrey, RAN, retired. It was formed shortly after World War II. Tingira Association of Australia is also part of our march today, along with the ACT branch of the Artillery Association. Coming into view too, we have the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery Association, ACT, the fraternal organisation for all members of the RAA, past and present in the ACT. Representatives too from the Field Battery, Royal Australian Engineers Association, 4th Field Troop RAE, commanded by Brigadier Matt Dalton, BSc. The contingent is representative of engineers posted to the ACT. The Royal Australian Engineer Corps are primarily responsible for combat and logistics support. Royal Australian Regiment Association is commanded by Brigadier Stephen Dunn, AM retired. It's the professional infantry regiment of the Australian Army and has served with distinction in the Korean War, the Malayan Emergency, confrontation in Malaysia and Borneo, the Vietnam War, the intervention in East Timor, the First and Second Gulf Wars against Iraq, plus the war in Afghanistan, and currently supporting Iraqi forces. Commander of the Australian Special Air Service Association is Mr. Rick Moore. It represents current and former members of the Special Air Service Regiment and invited veterans from select foreign Special Force units. The Commando Association is also moving past the dais at the moment, representing all past and present members of Commando units, including the independent companies and Z Special units of the Second World War. The Army Intelligence Corps Association was responsible for serving in most theatres of war to this day. Its personnel often work in small detachments to provide the support that is necessary. They're followed by the Royal Australian Corps of Transport, Royal Australian Army Service Corps, the Royal Australian Engineers Transport. A salute too to the Royal Australian Army Medical Corps Association. This was formed in 1903 and has provided a medical service wherever the Australian Army has been committed. The commander of the Australian Defence Force Nursing Group is Lieutenant Colonel Joanne Aiken, made up of serving nurses from the Navy, Army and Air Force. We have had a number of small groups pass from time to time, including the Royal Australian Army Dental Corps Association. Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps Vietnam Veterans was commanded by Brigadier Peter Bray, AM, retired. In 1965, the Australian troops began to deploy to Vietnam, including members of the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps. Those personnel were tasked to provide in-country support, which was essential for combat operations. The commander of the Royal Australian Army Ordnance Corps Association is Brigadier Nicole Longley, RAAOC Head of Corps. The Ordnance Corps can trace its origins all the way back to 1902. We have a representative or several representatives from the Royal Australian Army Electrical and Mechanical Engineers Association, which is set up to ensure the most efficient use of electrical and mechanical engineering resources. Salute now to the Citizens Military Forces Army Reserve Association from the Werriwa district. They're followed by the Royal Australian Air Force Association, Wing Commander Gordon Perch. Association's Wanderers branch membership is drawn from former and serving members of the Air Transportable Telecommunications Unit, later renamed the No. 1 Combat Communications Squadron. The Royal Australian Air Force contingent provided military aviation, which was first provided during World War I. During that war, both the armies and the navies of all major combatants operated aircraft. Late in the war, however, when it was realised that aerial fighting was a distinct form of warfare and not just an adjunct to land and sea operations, then of course some nations formed specialist air forces. Combining the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps, Great Britain formed the Royal Air Force in 1918. 4 squadrons of the Australian Flying Corps remained part of the AIF. However, in 1920, the remnants of the AFC became the Australian Air Corps. This in turn became the Australian Air Force on the 31st of March 1921, and with the King's consent became the Royal Australian Air Force on the 13th of August 1921. We have representatives too from 460 Squadron RAAF, first formed as a heavy bomber squadron in World War II in November 1941. By war's end, the squadron had lost 188 aircraft and more than 1,000 airmen. The Air Defence Guards Association is with us too, the commander there, Mr. Arthur Gale. Airfield Defence Guards, ADG, were initially established on infantry lines to protect RAAF assets and personnel. We salute to the peacekeepers. The Australian civilian peacekeepers and peacemakers are civilians from the Foreign Affairs and Trade Department, the Department of Defence and other government agencies who have served in warlike and non-warlike operations, including peacekeeping, since the Second World War. Commanding Army Headquarters is Brigadier Craig Short, DSC, CSC. Army Headquarters is located within the Russell Precinct in Australia's national capital, Canberra. The headquarters consists of about 450 personnel who are located within a number of staff branches, these covering career management, army chaplains, logistics, personnel, finance, land warfare, modernisation and strategic planning. The Australian Defence Force Academy midshipmen and officer cadets is well represented today, and it's a unique partnership between the Australian Defence Force and the University of New South Wales. It provides training and education for the future leaders of the Royal Australian Navy, the Army and the Royal Australian Air Force. Approximately 1,000 Navy midshipmen, Army and Air Force officer cadets are currently enrolled in the 3-year training program at ADFA. Another 300 are currently completing a 4th year of academic studies through the University of New South Wales. Cadets come from around Australia and through military exchange programs from 16 other defence forces around the world. The training they undertake will ensure they possess the skills, knowledge, professional abilities and qualities of character that are appropriate to officers in the Australian Defence Force. Today's Royal Guard is comprised of 1st, 2nd and 3rd year cadets from the ADFA. Passing the dais now, the Australian Red Cross contingent. As you would understand, it has a proud history of supporting Australian military personnel during World War II and in fact other conflicts. It was formed within days of the outbreak of the First World War and raised almost £5 million for the world's effort by the end. A contingent too from the United Kingdom, consisting of serving members of the United Kingdom Armed Forces who are stationed in Australia. The banner being carried there for the United States of America as well, consisting of serving Americans posted to our country in various capacities, such as on exchange or studying at service colleges. we can welcome to the Australian Navy Cadets in the training ship Canberra. In addition, the Regional Army Cadet Unit with the Commander Captain Victor Falkman, AAC. This was raised in the early 1920s with 224 Regional Army Cadet units operating from the multi-user depot at HMAS Harmon. They range from 13 to 18 years of age. Following on now, a very large group of Air Cadets, number 315 City of Canberra Squadron, Australian Air Force Cadets. This group boasts over 100 cadets. It was formed originally in 1951 at the old Canberra Courthouse and was originally known as 15 Flight Air Training Corps. Sponsored by the IAAF, it offers activities that include flying, field craft and adventure training in order to develop those qualities that encourage cadets to become responsible young adults. In 2001, the unit was renamed 315 Squadron under the organisational change from the Airplane Training Corps to the present-day Australian Air Force Cadets. They're followed by the Tuggeranong Squadron for the Australian Air Force Cadets. 34 Flight New South Wales Air Training Corps started as a trial flight in 1992. The first march of recruits occurred on Monday the 1st of February 1993. The Australian Air Force Cadets is a youth-oriented organisation. It's administered and actively supported by the Royal Australian Air Force. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to the parade marshals who've ensured all marching contingents arrived on time, stepped off in the correct order, and mostly on the right foot. A number of marshals of today's veterans are actually ex-service members. The war widows are being carried aboard bus transport. Those two buses carrying special representatives of Canberra legacy, the widows of veterans who've served in our country over many current and historical conflicts. While we must do and recognise the very special contributions of our veterans, we can often overlook the sacrifices and contributions of those left behind. We thank them today. Ladies and gentlemen, please keep the applause going in thanks to the many scouts, guides and girls and boys brigade members who assisted with today's march by carrying the name boards in front of those marching contingents. Could you also please show your appreciation to the band of the Royal Military College of Australia, led by Major Glenn Rogers, for their magnificent contribution to this morning's march past. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a great privilege to provide today's RSL ACT Branch Veterans March commentary on this, the 103rd anniversary of the Anzac landing at Gallipoli. I think you would all agree it has been a wonderful march.
Your Excellencies, thank you both for reviewing the march past, and to Mike Bailey for your informative commentary. And a special thank you to the many veterans and representatives who have chosen to march here today at the Australian War Memorial. Ladies and gentlemen, the Guard of Honour, mounted by the Australian Defence Force Academy and the band of the Royal Military College Duntroon, will now return to the parade ground. Well, as we wait for the Guard of Honour to return, the heart of the Australian War Memorial is the Hall of Memory, a quiet place for contemplation and remembrance of the efforts of ordinary Australians in war. Now, each one of the hall's 15 stained glass windows represents a defining quality of Australian servicemen and women, incorporating images of Australian soldiers, airmen, sailors, and a nurse, all from the First World War. Now, these windows were designed and constructed by Napier Waller, a Victorian artist who lost his right arm during the First World War. The walls and the dome of the hall are lined with one of the largest mosaics in the world, also the work of Waller, and unveiled in 1959. The catafalque party will now be mounted at the Stone of Remembrance. The catafalque party, provided by Australia's Federation Guard, consists of a commander and 4 members. These members represent the Royal Australian Navy, the Australian Army, and the Royal Australian Air Force. Ladies and gentlemen, this year the commemorative address will be delivered by the Honourable Kim Beazley.
Well, as we gather here today, our thoughts are not here. In our imagination, we are looking back exactly 100 years. We are with our honoured ancestors, specifically with the men of the AIF's 13th and 15th Brigades under Brigadiers William Glasgow and Pompey Elliott. We are at the strategically important town of Villers-Bretonneux. Theirs is a vital counter-attack to seize the town, one of the actions to sustain control of the approaches to the city of Amiens, critical for the British Army's ability to operate in France. It is the last of a series of defensive battles blunting Germany's last throw of the dice, beginning in March 1918. From that point, Australians had successfully engaged at Abertoon, Dernancourt, Moulincourt Ridge, Hangard Wood. Generally, as at Villers-Bretonneux this night, Australian brigades were engaging German divisions. Coming off our bloodiest year in 1917, and despite the British Army's setbacks early in the German offensive, our troops were of high morale. The fighting was expected to be vicious. The troops had bayonets fixed, equipped with more Lewis guns to make up in firepower what we now lacked in manpower. They are carrying more ammunition in bullets and bombs than normal. The troops were conscious it was Anzac Day. As a sergeant later wrote, "The moon sunk behind the clouds. There were houses burning in the town, throwing a sinister light on the scene. It was past midnight. Men muttered, "It's Anzac Day." It seems there was nothing to do but to go straight forward and die hard. The 57th Battalion began shouting and could be heard despite the noise. The sergeant again. The yelling rose high and passed to the 58th and 60th Battalions. Baying like hellhounds, they also charged. 2 years before this night, John Monash, then a brigadier, and a month or so after Villers-Bretonneux to be commander of the newly formed Australian Army Corps, reviewed the Gallipoli veterans in Egypt in the first Anzac Day parade. These troops, many of whom then went to France, were entitled to wear an A on their right shoulders. He said, "This famous day, our day," as he commenced this day's commemoration. The men of the 13th and 15th Brigades embellished this legend on this day 100 years ago. From this point on, we were largely on the offensive for the rest of the year, with battles at Hamel, Amiens, Mont-Saint-Quentin, capturing Peronne, breaking the Hindenburg Line and Montbretagne in October. Massively depleted though we were by these actions, and after a month's rest, we were prepared to resume when the war ended. Though only a small part of the British Army, we have never been as impactful on world history as we were this year of 1918. Monash's experimentation with combined armed operations at Hamel finally got fighting right. This was critical to the successes of the later battles, and we practiced them best. After Hamel, French President Georges Clemenceau visited the victorious Australians and he said, "I shall go back tomorrow and say to my countrymen, I have seen the Australians, I have looked into their eyes. I know what they, men who have fought great battles in the cause of freedom, will fight alongside us till the freedom for which we are fighting is guaranteed for us and our children." Then in 1918, it was a benchmark of German intelligence that if you found Australians on your front, you could expect to be attacked within 48 hours. The French living in the front lines knew our value too. As members of the 4th Division deployed north of Amiens, would-be refugees unloaded their carts when they saw them. As one of them explained to the diggers, "Not necessary for us to go now. Vous les tiendrez. You will hold them." As a digger told another departing civilian, "Fini retreat, madame, Baku's Australians ici." We emerged from the war triumphant but shattered, and in a sombre mood in Australia, which persisted through to the next World War. 1 in 2 extended families experienced a death. Over the decade or so after the war, 61,514 dead were joined by 60,000 others from war-related causes, a statistic not really well known in our country. An Australian image was created by the soldiers, a masculine image of manly virtues, mateship, courage, initiative, stoicism, inventiveness, skill. In gender terms, that was a very narrowly based perspective. The next war changed all of that. In 1914-18, we judged survival of the British project essential for our security. We emerged with a reputation that belied our short existence. In the next war, direct survival topped our agenda. We were all in, men, women, our immigrant and Indigenous populations. We were the most mobilised belligerent among the belligerents. The legend and example of the veterans of the First War was our rallying point. And that rallying point was extended in the Second World War to be societally all-encompassing. We have been a member of a minority group of nations in world affairs. We determine militarily to defend ourselves. Most countries don't. That doesn't mean we don't seek and appreciate allies and friends, nor does it eliminate the need for good international citizenship and a talent for turning past enemies and potential enemies into friends. However, that conviction of ours has seen our courageous record extend in numerous conflicts and peacekeeping activities. We are in the field now. We're a good friend to have. I believe at the heart of this conception is this day. It is a national day with a difference. A former American ambassador told me he found it a sombre day. My dad took me every year to a service. My mum would stay quietly home. She was a ward of legacy, would try to remember her father. He died of illnesses picked up in Egypt when he was with the 10th Light Horse, not at Gallipoli, but in the reinforcements after it. He passed when she was 2. I asked my grandmother why she never remarried. Well, 2 reasons. There were no young men, and there was pride in being a ward widow. Well, this day was not and is not the product of officialdom. Officialdom resisted it at the start. Anzac Day is a people's creation, a day for veterans. They speak and we join them. I must have attended in public life, both local and major services, around 100 of these gatherings. It is not a day for the politicians, except as they stand or sit humbly with their fellow citizens. This is the first major service I have spoken at in Australia in 33 years of public life. Well, we have come, all of us, to commemorate too the sacrifice of our allies, British, American, French, many others. Above all, the day has bonded us with our Kiwi kin. With them, it is as Monash said at the first Anzac Day, this famous day, our day.
Mr. Beazley, thank you for those remarks and for sharing your insights with us. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand for the singing of the hymn, O Valiant Hearts.
Oh, valiant hearts, who
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Wreaths will now be laid in the following order. The Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, His Excellency, General the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, and Her Excellency, Lady Cosgrove. The Acting Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Michael McCormack, and the New Zealand High Commissioner, His Excellency Mr Chris Seed. These wreaths are laid together in memory of the significance of Anzac to Australians and New Zealanders. The Chief Minister of the Australian Capital Territory, Mr Andrew Barr. Representing the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honourable Dr Andrew Leigh, and representing the President of the Senate, Senator Jane Hume. The Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia, the Honourable Chief Justice Susan Kiefel. the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, His Excellency Mr. Abel Guterres. The British High Commissioner, Her Excellency Mrs. Mena Rawlings, and the Turkish Ambassador, His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Vakur Gökdenizli. Representing the Leader of the Federal Opposition, Mr. Nick Champion. Representing the Chief of the Defence Force, Vice Admiral Ray Griggs, the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Mr. Kerry Stokes, and the National President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, Mr. Robert Dick. Representing the Chief of Navy, Rear Admiral Mark Hammond. Representing the Chief of Army, Major General Rick Burr. And representing the Chief of Air Force, Air Vice Marshal Gavin Turnbull. The National President of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Veterans and Services Association, Squadron Leader Gary Oakley, and accompanying the National President is Wing Commander Jonathan Lilly, today's didgeridoo player. Representing the National President of the Naval Association of Australia, Commander Peter Cook Russell, and the National President of the Air Force Association, Group Captain Carl Schiller. National President of the War Widows Guild of Australia, Mrs. Meg Green, and National President of the Australian Federation of Totally and Permanently Incapacitated Ex-Servicemen and Women, Ms. Pat McCabe. Final wreaths will be laid by the Chairman of Legacy Australia, Legatee Richard Cranner, accompanied by junior legatees Nathan Hill-Paul and Pia Piggott. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the reading of the Creed by the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Mr. Kerry Stokes.
On the morning of the 25th of April, 1915, Australians and New Zealanders landed under fire on Gallipoli. It was then, and in the battles that followed, that the Anzac tradition was formed and the bond within which Australia and New Zealand now lived was forged. Today, above all days, we remember all who served our nation in times of war and peace. We remember with pride their courage, their compassion and their comradeship. We remember what they accomplished for Australia and indeed for the freedom of mankind. We honour those who died or were disabled in the tragedy of war. Their stories adorn our nation's history. We grieve for the families of the fallen, particularly war widows and orphans. We recall with pride the selfless service of Australian men and women in places near and far, on battlefields in many lands, on or under the oceans, seas and waterways, and in the skies over many theatres of war and other operations. We remember those who suffered as prisoners of war and those who died in captivity. We remember staunch friends and allies. Those who have served our nation have bequeathed us a great legacy. May we and the generations to come prove worthy of their sacrifice.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing while we join together to sing the hymn, Abide with me. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing as the National President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, Mr. Robert Dick, recites the ode. After the ode, the last post will be sounded, followed by a minute's silence and the rouse. This will be followed by the national anthems of New Zealand and Australia.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. lest we forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. In a few moments, we will have the pleasure of witnessing a Royal Australian Air Force formation flypast consisting of 3 FA-18 Hornet fighters. Now, please be advised, these aircraft are very loud. These planes are operated by 2 operational training units based at RAF Base Williamtown, just near Newcastle. 2 operational training unit was formed at Port Pirie in South Australia in 1942 during the Second World War. And the FA-18 Hornets approach us now. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you could please stand as the catafalque party dismounts from the Stone of Remembrance. The Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, His Excellency General, the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, will now move to the saluting dais, where he will receive a royal salute to mark his departure. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Well, this year, His Excellency General, the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, the Honourable Michael McCormack, His Excellency Mr Chris Seed, Mr Nick Champion, Vice Admiral Ray Griggs, the Honourable Kim Beazley, Mr Robert Semple, Mr Kerry Stokes, the Honourable Dr Brendan Nelson and their guests will make their way into the Hall of Memory to lay floral tributes at the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. The floral tributes include small wooden crosses written on by Australian schoolchildren with messages of hope and of thanks for those who have served in Australia's name. Now, these crosses are also being placed on the graves of First World War Australian service personnel around the globe. To end the ceremony, please thank the Guard of Honour mounted by the Australian Defence Force Academy and the band of the Royal Military College Duntroon as they march off the parade ground. Ladies and gentlemen, today at 4:55, the last post ceremony in the commemorative area will conclude the memorial's Anzac Day commemorations of the landings on Gallipoli. And you are most welcome to attend. The last post ceremony is also streamed live on the memorial's YouTube channel and Facebook page, which can be accessed via the memorial website address listed in your order of service. Anyone who wishes to lay a wreath or floral tribute at the Stone of Remembrance may do so at the end of the ceremony. The memorial will open in about 15 minutes, and you're encouraged to visit the commemorative area to pay your own tribute. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the 2018 Anzac Day National Ceremony at the Australian War Memorial.